Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It didn't take long for Boris Johnson's bizarre TV interview over the sick four-year-old to go viral yesterday. But within hours, a very different take was fizzing across social media sites. People started sharing a claim purporting to be from a senior nurse that the picture of the child on the blankets on the floor was not what it seemed. This counter-narrative was soon picked up and shared by conservative-leading columnists. But who was behind it? Simon Brown tried to find out.
With just days to go until the election, Target's Voter digs into the claims and counterclaims that have littered social media as political parties scramble to control the debate. Yesterday, the Tories were on the back foot over this photo of a 4-year-old boy sleeping on the floor of Leeds General Infirmary.
This is a 4-year-old boy, Prime Minister, suspected of pneumonia, forced to lie on the floor on a pile of coats. You refuse to look at the photo. You've taken my phone, put it in your pocket, Prime Minister. His mother says the NHS is in crisis. What's your response to that?
I'm sorry. It's a terrible, terrible photo, and I apologise, obviously, to the families and all those who have terrible experiences in the NHS.
But soon another story started dominating social media. Allegations that the Health Secretary's special advisor had been punched by an angry Labour mob, bussed in by the party. The claims were repeated online by prominent journalists, then retracted when this video emerged of what really happened.
These people have devastated our country!
There was no punch.
I pointed my hand at you, walked into it.
But quickly the social media story moved back to the little boy in the hospital. Except this time it was being claimed the boy's mother faked the picture. A message circulates claiming to have a friend at Leeds Hospital insisting the incident was a left-wing propaganda story. The exact same unverified message was replicated by thousands of Twitter and Facebook accounts. A Facebook account appears to be one of the first to have posted the message that has been widely shared, including by pro-Brexit groups. But in another twist, its owner claims that her account was hacked and it was not her who wrote it. A version of the post is retweeted by Alison Pearson, a prominent columnist, and amplified exponentially, according to analysis by the academic Mark Owen Jones. Alison Pearson said she'll publish an explanation tomorrow as to why the photo is 100% fake. This tweet has since been deleted. So is the photo real? The Yorkshire Post, who first published the photo, say Sarah, the boy's mother, sent it to them. The paper's editor says they spoke to the hospital and they confirmed what happened. The saga shows how social media again is proving to be a murky battleground in British politics, and at the centre of it, a 4-year-old boy.
We are brought up to tell the truth, but the truth is a slippery thing. And certainly in a general election, when the pressure is on the parties to push any available buttons for electoral advantage. Take, for example, Boris Johnson's insistence there will be no border checks in the Irish Sea. There will be. And just today, John Ashworth, the Shadow Health Minister, appears to have been caught actually telling the truth about what he thinks of Labour's chances in some areas. They can't stand Corbyn and they think Labour's brought Brexit. He claimed the secretly recorded call with his Conservative activist friend was just a bit of banter. But if questions of trust have been amplified in this election, is the vehicle the unregulated digital space? And will that only grow and grow? Well, we'll discuss that in a moment. But first, here's Elizabeth Glinka.
Does the truth matter in this election?
I think it does. And I think it's very important. I think it's very important to hear from...
Trust has been one of the major themes of this election for both parties.
You sent an email on behalf of the Labour Party saying, imagine opening a 5-figure bill for your cancer treatment. Do you accept that that is totally misleading?
Against a backdrop of digital noise, claim and counterclaim, our trust in politicians, their political promises, but also their characters have been called into question.
We've certainly seen tactics being used on social media as well from the various political parties that we've not seen before, and we've seen tactics there as well that have definitely crossed the line and that we at Full Fact have called out as misleading and inappropriate when they've been used. It's certainly been a very busy time for us. We've had more people coming to our website looking for the facts, looking for the information that they need to inform their decision on how they're going to vote on December the 12th.
And now you come here for a press opportunity.
Well, actually, there's no press here.
What do you mean there's no press here?
The Conservatives' honesty in the run-up to and during this campaign has been repeatedly challenged, not that you'd know by looking at their lead in the polls. Labour's not faced the same degree of criticism, but its claims on Tory plans for the NHS have been called into question. And today its Shadow Health Secretary, John Ashworth, was seemingly caught out, saying one thing in public, but quite another in private.
Obviously I look upon Canal. I was a smart aleck, too clever by half.
The Lib Dems were accused of misrepresenting election data on some of their leaflets, while the SNP were forced by the courts to withdraw a leaflet they'd used to attack Lib Dem leader Joe Swinson over fracking. General election campaigns have always featured big promises and accusations of lying. But the opening up of digital platforms has provided a whole new unregulated sphere where parties can try and communicate their messages, whether they're truthful or not. So how do the party's online ads measure up? A study published today covering the first 4 days of this month looked at every paid-for Facebook ad from the 3 main UK-wide parties. For the Conservatives, it said that 88% of the party's most widely promoted ads featured claims which had been flagged by independent fact-checkers as either not correct or not entirely correct. For Labour in the same period, it said it could not find any misleading claims on their paid-for Facebook ads. However, it noted that the party's supporters were more likely to share unpaid-for posts featuring disputed claims. For the Lib Dems, the study said hundreds of potentially misleading ads had featured identical unlabelled graphs, claiming only they could win in particular seats. If you've been following this election, you'd be forgiven for thinking trust must be at an all-time low. But is that the case? Look at this graph going back to 1983. It shows that fewer than 1 in 4 voters have ever trusted politicians to tell the truth. Trust dipped to its lowest point during the financial crisis and MPs' expenses scandal in 2009. But today it's just 1 point above that at 14%.
What we are seeing, though, is a record number of people just saying spontaneously, when we ask them about the problems facing the country, that they're fed up with all politicians. And it's not so much about trustworthiness, it's just more about frustration at the process and the system. And indeed, we have a record number of people, 37%, saying our system of government now needs a great deal of improvement. So it's not so much honesty and trustworthiness, which are never very good for politicians. It's more about our system of politics as a whole.
They say trust once lost is lost forever, but perhaps that's not really the point when it wasn't there in the first place. So this election may come down not to who we trust to tell the truth, but who we trust to lead.
Elizabeth Glinka, well, in one of the latest indicators of just how little trust there is, a photograph of the little boy on the floor of Leeds General Infirmary because no bed was to be had sparked not only another NHS story, but also a campaign of digital misinformation. Gabriel Gatehouse has been investigating. Gabriel, what have you discovered?
Well, yesterday's campaign was basically dominated by this picture. I think we can get it up now, of the 4-year-old boy lying on the floor of Leeds General Hospital because, as you said, there were no beds. We probably saw Boris Johnson initially refusing to look at the picture when challenged by a reporter and then pocketing the reporter's phone before he eventually did look at it. But very swiftly after that incident, a counter-narrative emerged online. Somebody posted something on Facebook that seemed to be from a friend who is a senior nurse at the Leeds Hospital, and it basically said that the photograph had been posed. The boy shown on the floor by the media was in fact put there by his mother, the post said, who then took photos on her mobile phone before he climbed back onto his trolley. The post said that he'd been treated in paediatric A&E within 20 minutes and went on to say, I, the poster, am a nurse myself, and I'm so pissed off with fake news. Now, to be clear, Kirsty, this was fake news. The story about the boy on the hospital floor was true. The hospital itself confirmed it and apologised. But this counter-narrative started getting traction online. It was retweeted by Conservative candidates and former MPs and mainstream journalists.
So you've actually spoken to the woman who found herself the source of the fake news.
That's right. So Newsnight spoke to this woman. She is not from Leeds. She's not a nurse. She's a woman in her 50s. She said she'd been contacted on Facebook by somebody claiming to be an old school friend. She didn't recognise the name, but she accepted the friend request anyway, scrolled through her posts, saw this, copied and pasted it, left it for a while, and then within a few hours, things went completely mad online, found that she was being retweeted everywhere. Now, I can't verify that account, but we've got absolutely no reason to doubt it. And she says she is now getting all sorts of harassment online.
So what about the next pushback?
Well, then there was pushback online because people started looking into this woman. Who was she? They found out that her husband was a doctor who worked partially in the NHS, but partially also for a private healthcare company. And then they started looking at her son. Now, judging by his social media posts, he was quite involved in Conservative politics. And then the key thing, they found that he was friends on Facebook with the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Now, we've spoken to Matt Hancock's office. He says that this is one of the Facebook's account that's run by his staff. He said he's got no recollection of ever meeting Oliver Hepburn. His staff say he's never worked with him. This Facebook account, they say, has over 5,000 friends, and it is their policy simply to accept friends' requests. Now, not long before we came on air, I managed to speak to Oliver Hepburn, the son himself. He told the same story. He said, yes, he was friends with Matt Hancock on Facebook, but he'd never met him personally. He was involved in Conservative politics, he said, but he had no dealings with the Conservative campaign since this election campaign began. Now, I asked him outright, were you the origin of this fake story? And he categorically denied it. Again, I've got no way of verifying that, but I've got absolutely no reason to doubt his account. All in all, this was a significant piece of disinformation in the campaign. It's not clear who originated it, but it seems very clear that it was designed to cause mischief, and cause mischief it did.
Thanks very much. Well, neither the Conservative Party nor the Labour Party provided us with a frontbench spokesperson tonight, but I'm delighted to be joined by the Conservative peer and polling analyst, Lord Hayward, editor of the Daily Mirror, Alison Phillips, Brexiteer and historian, Professor Robert Toombs, and journalist who's campaigning for Labour, Paul Mason. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll come straight to you, Alison Phillips, because, of course, your paper, The Mirror, took that Yorkshire Post story and amplified it. And I wonder what you make of this disinformation campaign that's now come out of that.
I mean, the whole thing is hugely worrying because we're sitting here tonight on Newsnight 2 days before the election and we're not discussing why a 4-year-old boy was being treated on the floor of the LGI in Leeds. We're discussing misinformation and the impact it's having on our democracy, which I think we can probably all agree is incredibly worrying. We don't know, as your reporter says, we don't know the source of this story, but all we need to know is that they've done enough to confuse people, to sow mistrust and to take us away from the issues, and that's the worrying bit.
Yes, because that will presumably only grow as digital becomes ever increasing in campaigns.
And people don't know who to believe at that point.
Well, Professor Toombs, we have absolutely no idea who posted this. We've no idea the political stripe, if any. But what do you think the impact of that? Does it erode trust?
Well, as we've seen, trust is pretty low already. I think trust has been declining in politicians all across the Western world for about 20 years. There's been a great void growing up between citizens and their elected representatives, and we see that everywhere.
But do you think that's partly to do with you go right back to things like the expenses scandal in Iraq and so forth?
No, it goes further back than that. It's really to do with the loss of authority by elected governments, and their often willingness to pass on their authority to other bodies, of which the EU, of course, is the most important. We see it in France, we see it in Germany, we see it in Italy and Spain, we see it to some extent in this country, we see it worse still in America. So, I mean, this is not an English or a British problem, it is a general problem of democracy.
But what you have with the digital space,
yes,
it's
indeed.
rampant.
It is.
And Paul Mason, you know, I wonder, is it uncontrollable, no matter who's doing it?
Well, look, I think we should avoid any, it's the same on all sides here. Let's be really clear. There is a force in the world that is trying to systematically undermine Western democracies using disinformation. Well, there are several. One is the Russian government, and they are past masters at it. The second is the global far right. Now, it's significant that of the 6 Conservative candidates that I have in my list, 2 of them retweeted this piece of fake news from far right accounts. So I wouldn't be trying to track it down to Matt Hancock. I'm worried story.
No, I'm not. No one is trying to track into Matt Hancock.
Well, we did mention Matt Hancock, but it far more likely that what we have here is the symbiosis between conservative third parties. There are many of them working for the Conservatives as third-party accounts on Facebook, and the far right. That's where I would look, and indeed will be looking, to try and find out what actually happened with this piece of information, because it was shared millions of times, especially among health workers. Health workers were tweeting it to each other, saying, "Look, maybe they've got it wrong." Even like today, after we all knew it was wrong.
That's it. So, what we've got a situation, Lord Hayward, is that this is a very high-profile case, and now we are all talking about it, and we know that this is fake news. But the phenomenon is widespread.
Very widespread. In fact, I serve on a House of Lords committee which looked at this whole issue of bots and people having the capacity, not just the Russian state, but individuals in their back bedroom can produce literally thousands, if not millions, of messages and interfere with the democratic process. As has just been said, not just in this country, but in a large number of countries. It is very worrying.
But you say you have bots and you have kind of infiltration groups and so forth, but you have to admit that politicians themselves, particularly during election campaign, do play fast and loose with the truth. In this particular election, that has happened. So if politicians are doing it...
The only thing I disagree with is the use of the word "in this particular election." As has just been said in your introductory comments, politicians are always played fast and loose with facts, with statistics, with graphs. What we now have the capacity to do is to fact check that information at a speed which we've never had before, so the population can discover what is the fact, but you then get people who are putting non-news on there.
Does it actually matter if politicians tell the truth during an election campaign?
But it certainly matters that they don't deliberately lie and mislead the public. I mean,
does it matter if they obfuscate and prevaricate?
Well, we're supposed to have the common sense to see through this. And of course now, what Lord Hayward was saying is perfectly true. People have lots more sources of information. They have the ability to check these things much more easily than they could when Mr Gladstone or Mr Disraeli.
But does it matter if Boris Johnson tells the truth during, Prime Minister, does it matter if he tells the truth during this campaign?
What matters is that Boris Johnson carries out what the people voted for.
Does it matter that he tells the truth?
Yeah, of course it does. It matters that all politicians say what they genuinely think, insofar as they are able to know exactly what the truth is. We have a lot of opinions. People are accused of lying because people disagree with their opinions. And I think that's a very dangerous thing too. But it's possible to take more than one view of things.
But opinions and facts are entirely different.
Well, then, are they?
Aren't they? I mean, there could be a legal opinion, but it could actually be a fact laid down in an act.
There is something new going on here. I mean, these Lib Dem bar charts, the daft bar charts, have been around for decades, and politicians have lied for decades. But what is happening is that several forces in the world are trying to create the impression among voters and civil society that nothing can be verified anymore. I just don't know what's true anymore. That's what this was designed to do, so that people go away today and say, what do I know? Is it true or is it false? I'll get on with it.
Yes. Sorry, I was just going to say, and the point that anything can be verified in minutes actually makes it worse in some ways, because there's so much.
But there's a responsibility, isn't there, upon newspapers, obviously, on the broadcasters as well. And if you nail your colours to the mast as a newspaper, the Daily Mirror nailing your colours to Labour's mast, just as the Telegraph will nail its colours to the Tory mast, my question about that is, if Boris Johnson was to play a blinder and do something totally fantastic, would you report it in the Mirror? Because if you wouldn't, then you're only telling a partial truth.
Well, I mean, the Daily Mirror has been supporting Labour since 1945. So people who come to us know what they're getting. As you say, as people that go to Daily Telegraph know what they're getting. So that's kind of, you're working in the confirmed bias of what people expect.
It's a confirmed bias, so therefore, you break out of that, don't you?
So I think that's that. I think when we have a story that's verified, then I think that's, and the difficulty we have is that established news providers in this country are still playing by the rules. We're regulated, we've got the law of the land, and then you've got this whole other Wild West in social media, which is unregulated, which is huge more dangerous, and is worming its way into people's minds, and no one's got a handle on it.
But it's interesting because, in a sense, what, as you say yourselves in the Telegraph, are confirmation bias.
Yes.
And my point is still, if people are to understand what's going on in the world, don't you have a duty to report something extraordinary that might happen, that Boris Johnson might do something amazing?
And to be fair, we do. When there are some things that we have done on that, but we would always put it within the context of what we do. If you read something on social media, it doesn't come within that confirmed, within that context.
So it would always be, even if you were telling a story that was something extraordinary and fantastic, you would always turn turtle on it.
We may always have a certain scepticism, put it that way.
Lord Toombs, Professor Toombs, you talk about Gladstone and so forth. Obviously, there was, news travel very slowly then. Now news travels in microseconds. So this is only going to become a feature of modern democracy. That actually, even newspapers, everybody's going to be far behind, and even newspapers. What actually happens online will become much, much more important to the next generation.
What may happen, which would be worrying, is that people give up trying to work things out for themselves and pick on a leader who will do the thinking for them. And that's what we call populism. We see it with Jeremy Corbyn, we see it with Donald Trump, we see it even with people like Emmanuel Macron, who want to say that they're doing something different, and they will tell you what's really true. And that, I think, as you say, the huge overload of news and of fact and of opinion makes it very difficult for people to make their own minds up. That's why I think newspapers and the media and even people like us have some responsibility to try to say what we really think.
But does the means justify the end?
No, I don't think it does. As far as I'm concerned, the objective should be to provide within the round some sensible set of comments which has a degree of integrity and trust for politicians, which is beyond where we are at the moment. But we have to recognise that election campaigns have changed dramatically. Even in the last 10 years, you go to 2010, the dependence now for a large proportion of the population is not on newspapers. It's not on television programmes. It's actually on the social media. People under 30 are probably getting the vast majority of their information prior to going to vote on Thursday through social media. And probably politicians and the presenters of their arguments, including the traditional media, have not adjusted to that change yet.
So, can you regulate that digital space?
Well, look, there was a famous journalist, let's not bother naming her, who repeated this story, and she said, I've got it from 6 people. They looked like all bots. They were all anonymous people on the Twitter. Twitter needs to clean its act up because it allows anonymity in a way that Facebook doesn't. Facebook allows anonymous advertising, unfortunately, but Twitter needs to get rid of anonymous people. You cannot be a member of civil society while being anonymous. That's the issue.
Do people actually want the truth? Do they actually want to know what things will cost them and so forth?
Well, I think people do want the truth, but we've got to a worrying position where I think people want the truth that confirms what they already believe, and that's a really difficult place because then we're in this spiral of, and we need to find, if we are actually going to move forward, I think, for all the difficulties we've had over the last 3 years as a country, we need to have respect for the truth because it's the only way we're going to be able to move forward. Will we get the truth tomorrow before polling day from everybody, do you think?
Get a Zinoviev letter, you never know. Maybe MI5 will throw something on the table.
Thank you all very much indeed.